So this is an interview with Ken Sorge from Sorge CPA in the city of Monona. And today we're talking with Ken about his experience as both a business owner and a longtime resident. So before you came to Monona, where did you actually grow up?
I grew up in Burlington, Wisconsin, and until I was 18, and then moved to Madison for college, and yeah, that's.
So that's East Day. So for what I remember about our last discussion was that it was there's a connection to Madison, sort of over time. Was it your dad who came here to go to school?
Yeah, my dad and mother met in Madison when they were freshmen at the UW-Madison. My dad was recruited as a tennis player, and so when he first came to the UW, they had him as the third man as a freshman, so he was very good. They actually moved from Wisconsin, Reedsburg, and then to California where he learned to play tennis. And they moved back in his senior year of high school, and he was very good at tennis by then.
Yeah.
He won some tournaments out in California, and so as a freshman he was highly recruited for his tennis playing abilities more than anything.
Okay. And so the business is not really in his background, right?
No.
This was your interest.
Yeah, this was my interest. He was a veterinarian in the long run.
Did he end up practicing in this area?
He ended up practicing in Burlington.
Okay.
And that's where, he had nice practice there for many years.
Sure. What did he specialize in? What kind of veterinary medicine?
He was in both large and small animal, and then eventually he and his partner broke up, and the partner took the large animal and he took the small animal.
Oh, okay. All right. Did you have pets growing up?
Yeah, we had dogs and cats.
Yeah.
Pretty much dogs and cats.
Okay.
Yes, different dogs and cats at different times, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what brought you to this area eventually?
Eventually it was the wanting to go to the UW-Madison.
Yeah.
And a lot of the friends from high school and my sister, and of course the history from the parents going to UW-Madison. We all wanted to come to Madison, and we liked the city.
Yeah. So we were talking the other day about how it's an easy place to live, right? And it sounds like eventually it was a draw for more than just you. Eventually your mom joined you in this area.
My mom, right? She was in Burlington, and then my parents got divorced, and then after a few years she determined she wanted to live in Madison, and where my brother also lives in Madison. And I've got two brothers as well, Waukesha and Eagle, Wisconsin. So she had nothing left in Madison. My sister living in Las Vegas.
Right.
So she had nothing left. She had nothing left in Burlington.
In Burlington, right.
But in Madison, she had, her house was located at the eastern Madison part where she's accessible to most of her kids.
Right. You said
and grandkids.
Yes. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You have a pretty rich family, and that she had one requirement, which was that it had an in-ground pool. Is that right?
That's right. Right. Yeah. And so I actually bought the house, or put an offer and got an accepted offer without her ever having seen the house.
Yeah.
She just trusted me that the house would be appropriate. She's now lived there for over 20 years.
Yeah,
so
that's terrific. And I think, like a lot of residents, you have pretty deep roots in this area. We were remarking on how it is that you actually chose the house that you're living in now. Turned out to be right next door.
Right. Well, it wasn't. Actually, we moved from another place in Madison. Originally, we came from Princeton, Illinois. We both got jobs in Princeton, Illinois, originally out of college, and then we moved to Dixon, Illinois, when I got recruited by a CPA firm there, which eventually became Clifton Gunderson, and then I got a job up in Madison with Aho Henshin Hall, which eventually merged into Williams Young, which eventually became Whipfley.
Yeah.
And then eventually we moved out of the east side of Madison and into Monona.
Okay.
And so we've been in Monona many years. Started off at 5308, which was a wonderful house, was eventually knocked down and replaced here a few years ago.
Okay.
But we had then moved to the place next door, 5310.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the neighborhood do that.
Yeah.
And then eventually moved to a condo at 101 Furchland Place.
Right.
So that's where we currently reside.
Right. And you have your kids
Close
by.
Kids are close by. They live in a new development out by Sprecher Road and out by the Great Dane out there, the water tower. They're both very close to that in the park.
Yeah.
And so they just happen to live there with my daughter and her husband with 4 grandkids, ages 2 to 10.
Yeah.
And my son living out there just a couple of blocks away from her.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Son still works in our business as well as a CPA.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
so he's one of the shareholders, one of 4 of us shareholders.
Right.
So
Right. I remember you saying that it's one of the draws for the community is the opportunity to be in nature. You're an avid sportsman. You have a lot of. Tell me about all of the sports and activities that you do.
Probably the main sport is tennis. I'm not a great golfer, so I play golf when forced to.
Yeah.
And I leave my clubs up north where it's more enjoyable to golf. But and then I also have motorcycle. I grew up with a couple of motorcycles as a young in Burlington, and then we have a couple of dirt motorcycles up at our cabin up north. So we ride around on those, and the grandkids get rides. And so those are really fun.
And they enjoy it. Yeah. And that the motorcycle riding is a way that is something that gets you and your wife out in different parts between that and your cycling.
Right. Yeah, we do. She will ride around Madison. I don't go venture very far from home. We've done the rustic roads in Dane County, and I'm not fond of necessarily riding long distances with a motorcycle because I can't control what other drivers do.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I take it back and forth to work and are a little around Dane County here and there. And eventually we'll probably venture out further, but just on the less busy roads.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So your son's in business with you right now.
Yeah, right.
Talk a little bit about how it is that you decided on your career, because that it isn't quite what you started out with.
Right. I originally, when I was 15 or 16, I was very interested in the stock market and understanding the dynamics of the stock market, and so I thought being a stockbroker would be something whereby, at the time, I thought that stockbrokers analyze stocks and these things, but there are actually analysts out there. So when I originally came to school, my kind of thought was to become a stock analyst, and determined that those jobs are few and far between and difficult to get. So I went for something accounting, which would be something that was much more employable. Yeah. And these days, and especially during that time with the baby boomers coming through, we had more difficulty finding jobs. So I wanted to make sure that I had opportunities during my career to find things, and so that's what I ended up going toward. And
so did you found the firm that you're working in now?
I found the firm. Right. It was out of our 5308 in the basement with a 386 computer, which was the old computers and monochromic
The display.
Yeah, display. So, yep, that's how we started that.
Okay, all right. And you attracted partners over time.
Over time we grew it, and a few years ago we started acquiring other practices. Well, actually, acquiring other practices. We've done that for about 20 years.
Yeah.
But outside of the area, the last few years, we've acquired practices out of Waukesha, Watertown, Delavan, Oshkosh, Marion, Stoughton, and Madison office, which is separate from the Monona office.
Monona office, right.
So,
Yeah.
and all of the challenges that come with acquiring and growing, there are different challenges as the firm grows that you don't necessarily. You have a feeling that things will change, but you don't truly know it until you experience it.
Yeah, you don't know how. Yeah, yesterday we were talking about the realization that at a certain point there was a balance to be struck between administrative support so that your key performers could continue to do their work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we found that there are a lot more administrative staff, and as time goes on, we determined that while figuring out compensation used to be fairly simple, basically a function of what their production was.
Yeah.
Now it's a little bit more difficult because you have admin people who don't get billable time, whereas people who are production, they have more billable time. They're going to have more billable time because of the admin people, so we have to determine, there has to be a higher billable for the billable people, and there's a lower billable for the admin people.
Right.
And I happen to be one of the admin people as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And so that's been a transition for you. Right now you have a very different role than when you started. What is it that you're doing mostly now?
So as things were transitioning, I was the internal IT guy. Computer Magic is in our building as well. There are heavy lifting IT, but you still need an internal IT person to understand how to operate the different pieces of software specifically for our business that a general IT firm isn't going to retain for you. So we have to have that. And so I functioned as that until more recently when we hired an outside individual who then I trained by having him for a month work with me basically in my office with the same setup, and he documented systems. Systems were documented, but they were better documented as we refreshed the documentation so that he had a guideline as to how to address certain problems and those kind of things, and objectives that we have.
Yeah.
We've added different pieces of software, a little more sophisticated in team member reviews and a little more advanced. We use ADP for our payroll. However, it's the advanced version whereby we have goals and we track goals and those kinds of things. And so I am now the HR person.
Yeah.
Which and finance, so I kind of, and admin, those roles are kind of combined.
Yeah.
Until we get someone who's better at HR than I am.
Sure.
And those roles over time I'll phase out is the objective. Right now we have Amy Raven, who's the managing partner of the firm, and then I do what I can to support her. And there's a lot to learn over many years, and so it's an ongoing role, and we have succession planning.
Right.
10 years ago we had a 20-year plan.
Yeah.
So we're 10 years into our 20-year plan of getting me out.
Yeah. I mean, that takes a lot of commitment and I think a lot of confidence to and self-awareness to be able to know and observe that that's what's happening. And take the right action. Yeah, that's a lot of growth. You've
got to be humble and realize that we're all temporary.
Yeah, great. But it's also sounds like it's been a comfort for you because it's enabled you to take significant time away and more with more confidence, which
Right.
has allowed you to travel. So we were talking a little bit about that's one of your interests.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I was able to travel this year with my wife to Switzerland and Greece and Napa and up north, those kinds of things. Can't really totally get away, but you can feel better when you do leave to know that, especially in my case, the IT is being taken care of, because that's the thing that if it's on fire, you have to put it out.
Right.
Whereas other things, they can be delayed until I get back or whatever. But the IT is something that you can't. So we have the heavy lift firm plus our internal, and they can take care of those things now pretty well without me.
Okay, that's good. Tell a little bit more about your trips. There was something specific about a connection.
Oh, right, yeah. We had went with Margaret Jankowski, and she has a significant other who she's married to in Switzerland, and they kind of have a long distance relationship for the time being until he retires, I believe. And then they determine where they want to live.
Yeah.
Whether that's U.S. or Switzerland. Yeah. And anyway, we went with Margaret to Switzerland to visit, and we were gone for 2 weeks. I've never been gone for 2 weeks before. And then during that time, we also popped over to Greece for several days and came back and to Greece is one of the islands, Spetses Island, and then to Athens for another day, and then back to Switzerland and did our wine tasting and those kinds of things. And,
beautiful.
And a little bit into Germany, those kinds of things, and then back. So,
nice.
Yeah, it was
Does either of you have heritage? Is that in your background?
I have a German heritage. Sorge is actually Norwegian, but I've always been told I'm German or French. But if you look at the ancestry DNA analysis, I've actually have some Acadian background as well. So that was Thibodeau, my grandfather from my mother's side. Was he actually was in Canada. So there's some Acadian blood there too. So I probably have some not Native American. I guess. What would you call it? A Native Canadian?
First I know that they refer to the people as First Nations. So
right. Oh, First Nation, right. I've got some First Nation blood in me, almost certainly.
Yeah.
And so from the French who interface with the locals, kind of thing over many years. So
that's interesting. So you actually did the DNA research,
right? Yeah. They showed it. They showed where it ends. Some Eastern European, and so it's interesting that our more recent generations, they don't know. They had many generations of Germans, and in Wisconsin, Reedsburg, we had the Sorge farm, quote unquote, which we had a couple of Fredericks. We had a Walter and an Edward all on that farm, and then my father also grew up on that farm, and they had the outhouses, a very small house. And so eventually, my father became a veterinarian. My grandfather on my dad's side actually. After a while, he did go to the UW as well.
Oh, okay.
And for the short program, they call it, he became a milk plant troubleshooter, and he would go from Genoa, Wisconsin. There was something in Michigan. He stopped there a few places, and then he ended up out in California, where it's also a dairy state.
Right.
And that's where they spent a lot of time. And my dad got very good at tennis there, and then eventually, my great-grandfather went out to visit. He actually died of a heart attack in one of the, I think it was John Muir Woods or one of the redwood forests out there. And anyways, they determined that they had to come back and help with the farm, and so they came back to the farm.
Okay.
And my grandfather was fairly ambitious, and he started a farm implement business as well, and eventually that was sold, and he became a truck driver for the end of his career, and they traveled around. My dad did some summers with him doing the truck driving as well.
Yeah.
Before he became a veterinarian.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the long story on that side.
That's how he got to see the
Yeah.
world at that time. Mm-hmm. So, okay, so we're back in the Monona area, and you've settled down and had 2 kids, and you've established a business. And what do you see for the future for your business? I know that you've diversified incredibly in the past few years.
Right.
What is the time frame
Right.
on that?
Right. Yeah. Very good question. First of all, I couldn't have done it without my wife supporting me. She was a school social worker, and we went from double income to just one income and 2 kids, and we took quite a risk, and she supported me throughout that whole thing. So there's got to be a lot of credit there. Liz, Elizabeth,
okay.
right? And she grew up in Monona until we moved to Illinois and then back again. So, but yeah, the future of Sorge, we had planned to continue to acquire other accounting firms. With the latest acquisition and the challenges and the larger, we are not as interested in getting almost 60 now, and so over time we're gonna maybe I'm not the person to be deciding whether we acquire more. That's a burden on the remaining people.
Sure.
They were excited as well for a while, and but we have to fix some things. We have to have systems in place for a little bit larger firm that we are now. That we, instead of operating as a little bit smaller firm, we have to operate as a little bit larger firm. And there aren't any thoughts there. We've been approached by other firms to be acquired as well. So far, it hasn't been really interesting, but we listen. Here and there, but it's not really interesting to the rest of the team. It's really not up to me in the long run.
Yeah.
I still own most of the stock, but it's something that we really have to let the others decide on the direction instead of dictating.
Right. Right.
Because that's the future.
Right, and that's and this is your legacy, right? And it's a very personal connection to something that you built. You want to see it handed off, and think about it in terms of what's best for it. You'd like to see it, I'm sure, survive you and thrive.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it doesn't have to survive me necessarily. It's it's more important that the team members determine where it goes from here.
Yeah.
And I'll continue to gather information, do my part, and I'll get direction from the shareholders.
Sure. Sure. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's right. It's not just your investment.
Right.
It's other folks
too.
Right.
Right. And I'm not the managing. We're people. The team members look to me oftentimes still, and that's difficult for the managing partner, Amy, because she needs to be able to be the person. If we've handed off that responsibility, she needs to be able to take it instead of me tripping her up.
Sure.
In that, so I have to redirect sometimes attention from others to her so that she can make the decisions.
I'm sure that feels very supportive, and she appreciates it, and that's the kind of relationship you want.
Right. I've made my mistakes, but over time, I hope that I come across as I'm supporting her.
Yeah.
Kids are Claire and Carl. Carl's CPA, Claire's a photographer. Her husband's very successful with Wild Honda. He was a salesman, and now he's a business manager. And so that's where the 4 grandkids are currently. I'm not sure what my son's plans are there. We'll find out.
Okay. The future to be determined for him.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's good.
I think that's good too. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.